My name is Harper, I'm 19, and the night I almost lost my life, my parents weren't there. While I was hooked to machines in the ICU, they chose to celebrate my brother instead. That moment shattered me in ways I can't forget. This is the story of betrayal, survival, and finding my own strength. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories on family drama, revenge, and emotional courage. I still remember the sound before I opened my eyes, the sharp, steady beeping of a heart monitor. It felt distant at first, like a sound coming through water. Then slowly, it grew louder, pulling me back into the world I wasn't sure I wanted to wake up to. My throat burned, my chest ached, and when I tried to breathe, it felt like my lungs were made of sandpaper. I blinked against the harsh hospital lights, struggling to piece together what had happened. The room was cold. Too cold. My skin prickled under the thin hospital blanket, and my hands shook when I tried to move them. My vision blurred, but even through the fog, I noticed the empty chair beside me. The chair that should have held my mom, maybe my dad, anyone who cared. But it was empty. Completely empty. A nurse walked in just then, her voice soft and cautious. "You're awake, Harper. You're going to be okay." She adjusted the tubes running into my arm, checked the monitor, and gave me a practiced smile. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. "Where's my family?" For a moment, she hesitated. I caught it, the slight pause before she answered. "They had to step out," she said gently, but her eyes flickered away. It wasn't the truth. I could feel it. My parents weren't outside grabbing coffee or talking to a doctor. They weren't anywhere near this sterile room. I wanted to believe they would come rushing back through the door any second. I wanted to believe that I mattered enough for them to sit here, even if I was unconscious. But I already knew. Deep down, I already knew where they were. The muffled sound of laughter drifted in from the hallway. Not from visitors for me, but from families waiting for their loved ones. I pictured other parents clutching hands, whispering prayers, refusing to leave even for a moment. And then there was me, alone. It wasn't long before the nurse came back, trying to distract me with small talk. I pushed again, my voice steadier this time. "Please, just tell me, where are my parents?" Her lips pressed into a line. "Harper, they went to your brother's birthday party. They said they'd come by after." My stomach dropped. The words echoed in my head, louder than the monitor, louder than my own heartbeat. My brother's party. They chose balloons and cake over their daughter hooked up to wires. They chose music and dancing over the risk of losing me forever. The betrayal hit harder than the pain in my chest. It wasn't just about tonight. It was about every time in my life I had come second to my brother. Every missed birthday of mine, every forgotten achievement, every time I had been pushed aside so he could shine. Tonight wasn't an exception. Tonight was proof. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back. Crying wouldn't change the truth. I turned my face toward the wall, my heart aching in ways no medicine could fix. The hours dragged on. Nurses came and went, checking my vitals, adjusting IVs, whispering in the corners like they didn't want me to hear. I wasn't supposed to know I had flatlined earlier that night. I wasn't supposed to know the doctors had said I might not make it till morning. But I did know. I could read it in their eyes. And yet, my parents were at a party. At one point, a doctor leaned over me and said quietly, "You're strong, Harper. You've pulled through something most people wouldn't." His words should have comforted me. But all I could think was, strong or not, I was still the daughter left behind. When midnight rolled around, I heard my phone buzz on the table beside me. With shaky fingers, I reached for it. A single message from my brother lit up the screen. "Hope you're feeling better. The party was amazing. You should have seen it." I stared at the words until they blurred. No apology. No concern. Just bragging. My hands trembled so badly I almost dropped the phone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip out the wires and prove that I was worth more than being forgotten. But instead, I sank deeper into the pillow, letting the bitterness crawl into my chest like a second heartbeat. The night dragged on, long and heavy. I dozed in and out, haunted by the image of my parents clapping for my brother while I gasped for air under fluorescent lights. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw balloons, cake, and smiles, all at my expense. When the door finally creaked open around dawn, I looked up, hope rising despite everything. But it wasn't my parents. It was a janitor, quietly sweeping the floor, humming to himself. My hope crumbled like glass. By morning, I wasn't just hurt, I was changed. Something inside me hardened that night, something that wouldn't ever go back to the way it was. I knew, without question, that I was on my own. My parents had made their choice, and it wasn't me. That night, the night I lay in a hospital bed while they danced under disco lights, was the night everything I believed about family shattered. It wasn't just a hospital stay. It was the beginning of a truth I could no longer ignore. And that was the night that changed everything. Lying there in that sterile hospital room, the truth hit me harder than any needle or monitor could. It wasn't just about that one night, it was about my whole life. That empty chair beside my bed had always been empty in one way or another. I thought back to when I was a kid. Birthdays in our house were never equal. When it was my brother Mason's birthday, the house looked like a carnival. Balloons covered the living room, relatives poured in with wrapped gifts, and Mom would spend hours baking a 3-tier cake. There were sparklers, music, even neighbors dropping by just to admire how special he was. My birthdays? A single candle stuck into a cupcake from the grocery store. Sometimes not even that. Once, I remember Mom patting my shoulder and saying, "Sorry, Harper, money's tight this year. We'll make it up to you." They never did. I tried not to complain. I told myself maybe I was being dramatic, maybe Mason was just the firstborn, and that's why everything seemed bigger for him. But even as a little girl, I knew the difference between love and leftovers. School events were no different. I still remember sitting on the stage in 2nd grade, clutching a certificate for perfect attendance. I had practiced my smile for days, imagining my parents cheering from the audience. But when I looked out, the seats where they should have been were empty. Mason had a soccer game that same afternoon, and they'd chosen that instead. When I got home, my certificate lay on the kitchen table, unnoticed under a pile of unopened mail. It wasn't just the big milestones. It was the little things too. Mason's artwork got taped to the refrigerator, every crooked crayon line treated like a masterpiece. My drawings stayed in a pile on my desk until they curled at the edges and went into the trash. If Mason brought home a B on a math test, there were hugs and pizza to celebrate. When I brought home straight A's, the most I ever got was, "That's nice, Harper." I learned to stop expecting applause. Even holidays carried the same theme. One Christmas morning, Mason unwrapped a brand new gaming console, while I sat cross-legged on the carpet with a pair of socks and a book I'd already read. "Be grateful," Dad said when he saw my face fall. "Mason works so hard, he deserves it." I was 12. What kind of work did they think a 12-year-old was doing? As I got older, the favoritism grew more obvious. Family dinners revolved around Mason's stories, his friends, his sports, his future. I'd try to share something from my day, but I'd barely get 2 sentences in before Mom interrupted with, "That reminds me, Mason." Every conversation circled back to him like he was the center of the universe, and I was just a satellite orbiting in silence. I'll never forget the night of my junior year choir concert. I had begged them for weeks to come. It was my first solo, something I had worked on for months. I stood under the stage lights, heart pounding, eyes scanning the audience for their faces. They weren't there. Afterward, I found a note taped to the fridge at home. "Sorry we missed it, Mason's team had playoffs. Proud of you though. Proud of me though." 5 words that felt like crumbs tossed to a starving child. The worst part wasn't the favoritism itself, it was how normal it became. I stopped inviting them to things. I stopped sharing good news. It was easier to keep my excitement to myself than to watch it die in their silence. By the time I was in high school, I had trained myself not to expect anything from them at all. But deep down I still hoped. Some small part of me believed that one day, in some important moment, they'd finally choose me. That hope was the only thing that kept me from giving up completely. The night in the ICU crushed that last piece of hope. It wasn't just that they weren't there, it was that I wasn't surprised. Not really. When the nurse told me they had gone to Mason's party, it felt like confirmation of what I had always known. Mason was the golden child, and I was the afterthought. Always had been. Always would be. That realization burned through me like fire. I remembered the family reunion when I was 14. Mason had spilled soda all over the picnic table, ruining the food, and everyone laughed it off. Boys will be boys. When I accidentally broke one of Grandma's plates, I got scolded so harshly I cried in front of everyone. The memory of Mason smirking as I wiped my tears came rushing back that night in the hospital, sharper than ever. Then there was prom. Mason got a brand new suit, custom tailored, and Mom took 100 photos of him on the porch. I had to borrow a dress from a friend because money was tight again. When I asked for a picture, Dad sighed and said, "Let's not waste the camera battery." Piece by piece, the pattern stacked up until it was undeniable. I turned onto my side in that hospital bed, clutching the blanket like it could shield me from the memories. Every slight, every dismissal, every stolen moment came back in a flood. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a lifetime of being invisible, of being told without words that my worth was less. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. For the first time, I stopped making excuses for them. I stopped telling myself they didn't mean it, that maybe I was too sensitive, that one day they'd change. That night stripped away the illusions. I wasn't second best. I wasn't even on the list. The machines beeped steadily beside me, keeping rhythm with my thoughts. I stared at the ceiling, my chest tight but not from the tubes or the medicine. It was the weight of years pressing down on me, heavier than anything the doctors could diagnose. A nurse came in quietly, checking my four. "You're strong, Harper," she said again, the same words the doctor had used earlier. This time I almost laughed. Strong wasn't a choice. Strong was survival when love was always rationed out in halves, when the people who should have lifted me up kept pushing me to the sidelines. As she left, I whispered to myself, "I'm done being second best." The words hung in the air, soft but sharp. It wasn't a promise yet, not fully formed, but it was the first time I admitted out loud what I had carried for years. That night in the ICU, I realized my whole life had been training me for this moment. Not the sickness, not the machines, but the awakening. The clarity that I couldn't keep living in the shadows of their favoritism. And as I lay there in the half-light of morning, tubes in my arms and the taste of metal still in my mouth, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never let them make me feel invisible again. The first time I walked through the front door after being discharged, the house felt different. It wasn't the walls or the furniture. They were the same as always, but the air inside pressed on me like a weight. I had spent nights in a hospital bed wondering if my parents would finally look me in the eye and admit what they had done. But they didn't. "Glad you're home," Mom said flatly, not even glancing up from her phone. Dad carried my bag inside, dropped it by the stairs, and asked if I wanted soup. That was it. No hug. No apology. No acknowledgement of the fact that I had nearly lost my life while they were busy lighting candles on Mason's cake. I wanted to scream. Instead, I forced a smile and said, "Soup's fine." My voice sounded foreign to me, steady when I was anything but. The days that followed blurred into each other, each one heavier than the last. Mason strutted through the house like nothing had happened, laughing loudly on phone calls, showing off the new sneakers he had gotten as a gift at his party. Sometimes I caught him smirking at me, as if he knew he had won some invisible competition between us. At night, I lay awake replaying the sounds of the hospital machines, my chest tightening at the thought of how close I had come to disappearing without anyone noticing. During the day, I plastered on a face that said I was fine. But inside, I was breaking in ways I couldn't put into words. It wasn't just my family. Outside the house, whispers followed me too. At the grocery store, I overheard two neighbors talking. "Did you hear? Harper was in the ICU. Poor girl. But her parents weren't even there." Can you imagine? The shame burned through me. I rushed past them, head down, wishing I could vanish. At school, the rumors spread faster than wildfire. My best friend, Emily, pulled me aside in the hallway one morning. "Harper, is it true? Your parents skipped the hospital for Mason's party." Her eyes were wide with pity. That pity cut deeper than gossip ever could. "Yeah," I whispered, forcing a laugh like it didn't matter. "Guess they like balloons more than IVs." My joke landed flat, and Emily's expression softened with sympathy. That was the last thing I wanted. I avoided the cafeteria for weeks. I couldn't stand the sideways glances, the hushed voices that trailed behind me. Even teachers looked at me differently, as though they weren't sure if they should ask how I was doing or pretend nothing had happened. At home, the silence was worse than the whispers. My parents tiptoed around me, not out of guilt, but as though acknowledging the truth might inconvenience them. The only time my mother mentioned the hospital at all was one night when I left dishes in the sink. "You know, Harper, we've been under a lot of stress too," she snapped. "Don't think you're the only one who's been through something." Her words hit me like a slap. Stress? She had been stressed at a party while I fought for air under fluorescent lights. I wanted to yell, to lay bare every ounce of anger I had bottled up, but the words froze in my throat. Instead, I picked up the plates and washed them in silence, tears slipping down my cheeks as the water ran over my hands. That silence became my prison. I carried it with me to bed, to school, even to the bus rides where I stared out the window pretending the blur of trees could take me somewhere else. I started journaling late at night, the only place I could be honest. Page after page filled with messy handwriting, words spilling out like they had been waiting years to be freed. I wrote about the ICU, about the empty chair, about the sound of laughter I had imagined from across town. I wrote about every time I had been ignored, dismissed, or forgotten. The notebook became my secret witness, the one place I didn't feel invisible. But writing didn't erase the reality I lived in. The tension at home grew sharper. One afternoon, Mason barged into my room without knocking, holding up his phone. "Look, Harper, someone posted clips from my party. I went viral." He grinned, shoving the screen in my face. The video showed him blowing out candles, surrounded by cheering friends, while I lay alone hooked up to machines. My stomach churned. I pushed his phone away. "Congratulations, Mason," I muttered, my voice dripping with sarcasm. He laughed, not even catching the bitterness. "You should have been there." I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms. He didn't realize how cruel those words were. Or maybe he did, and that made it worse. School didn't get easier either. A group of girls in my English class whispered loud enough for me to hear. If my parents did that, I'd run away. Another said, "No wonder she always looks so sad." I wanted to stand up, to tell them I wasn't sad. I was furious. But anger felt dangerous in a world where I had no one to back me up. The only small comfort came from Emily. She sat with me in the library at lunch, quietly sliding over half her sandwich when she noticed I wasn't eating. One day she said, "Harper, you don't have to go through this alone. I see you. I really do." Her words nearly undid me. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. It was the first time in weeks I had felt truly seen. But even with her kindness, the weight never lifted. I carried it everywhere. The shame, the anger, the loneliness. Every hallway at school felt like a spotlight. Every dinner table at home felt like a stage where I was expected to smile and play the quiet daughter, while Mason shone under their praise. Sometimes I locked myself in the bathroom just to breathe without an audience. I'd stare into the mirror whispering, "You matter, Harper. You matter." Over and over like a prayer. Some nights I believed it. Most nights I didn't. The worst moment came one Sunday morning at church. The pastor asked families to stand together and hold hands during a prayer. My parents reached for Mason without hesitation, their hands locking around his like he was their only child. I stood at the end of the row, empty-handed, staring at the polished floor until the prayer ended. The hollowness inside me that day was almost unbearable. By the time spring rolled around, the struggles outside the hospital had carved themselves into me as deeply as the scars on my body. I walked through each day carrying an invisible burden, one no one else could lift. And yet somewhere in the middle of all that pain, a spark of defiance began to grow. Quiet but steady. It whispered to me late at night when I held my pen over the journal pages. It told me I wasn't broken. I was just tired of being treated like I was. That spark didn't erase the struggles, but it gave me something I hadn't had in a long time. The beginning of a voice. That spark inside me, the one that had whispered I wasn't broken, grew louder with every passing week. By the time graduation season arrived, it wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was a steady drumbeat in my chest, reminding me that I had spent years swallowing words that deserved to be spoken. The morning of graduation, I stood in front of the mirror smoothing out the creases in my gown. The deep blue fabric felt heavier than I expected, as though it carried the weight of every silent dinner, every ignored achievement, every time my parents had looked past me. My cap sat awkwardly on my head, tassel swinging over one eye, and for a brief second I almost laughed. But then I thought about the rows of families that would fill the auditorium, cheering, clapping, beaming with pride. I thought about my parents who would sit tall and smile, not for me but for Mason. They'd come with signs, maybe even flowers, ready to celebrate their golden child while I, once again, would fade into the background. Not this time, I promised myself. The bus ride to school was quiet. My classmates chattered about college, jobs, summer trips, but I sat with my hands clenched in my lap, rehearsing words in my mind. The ceremony wasn't just about walking across a stage. It was about taking back something that had been stolen from me my whole life. When I arrived, the gym buzzed with excitement. Students lined up, gowns swishing, cords and medals gleaming around their necks. I adjusted my own modest honor cord and scanned the crowd for Mason. Of course, he was near the front, laughing with friends, the tassel on his cap tilted just so, like he belonged in a magazine spread. He spotted me and smirked. "Don't trip up there, Harper. Wouldn't want you to embarrass yourself on the big day." The old me would have let it slide. This version of me only narrowed my eyes and replied, "I'll leave the embarrassing part to you." His smirk faltered, just slightly, before he turned back to his friends. It was a small victory, but it made my heart pound with quiet satisfaction. The ceremony began with the principal's voice booming through the microphone, words about achievement, resilience, and bright futures. Parents clapped, camera flashes flickered, and the smell of roses from a dozen bouquets floated through the air. As I sat waiting for my name to be called, my palms grew slick with sweat. I had planned what I needed to say, but the weight of it pressed hard on my chest. Would I really do it? Could I really stand there, in front of everyone, and finally speak the truth? When my row rose, my knees felt weak, but I forced myself to walk tall. The lights seemed too bright, the stage too wide. Yet when my name was called, Harper Lane, I heard a scattering of polite applause. No cheers. No shouts of pride. I walked across, shook the principal's hand, and accepted my diploma. Behind me, the clapping swelled as Mason's name was called next. The crowd roared, parents whistled, his friends stood and hollered. My parents leapt to their feet, waving and cheering as though the entire ceremony had been staged for him alone. That was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The moment when invisibility became unbearable. Before I even realized what I was doing, I turned back toward the microphone. My classmates were still clapping for Mason, my parents still beaming. I stepped forward, heart hammering, and cleared my throat. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. The room quieted, heads turning. I felt hundreds of eyes on me, but for once, I didn't shrink. I stood taller. "I know this isn't part of the program," I began, my hands trembling as I gripped the edges of the podium. "But I need to say something before I leave this stage." A murmur rippled through the audience. My parents' smiles faltered. Mason looked at me like I had lost my mind. I took a deep breath. For years, I've sat quietly while people pretended not to notice how invisible I was. I've worked hard, I've endured more than most of you will ever know. And still, I was overlooked. Even when I was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for my life, the people I needed most weren't there. They were too busy celebrating someone else. Gasps filled the auditorium. I saw Emily in the crowd, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears brimming in her eyes. My voice steadied, stronger now. But today, I refused to stay silent. Today, I want you all to see me. I am not second best. I am not invisible. I am Harper Lane, and I deserve to be here just as much as anyone else. For a heartbeat, the room was frozen. Then slowly the applause began. It started with Emily, clapping so hard her hands must have stung. Then a few more joined. Then rows of students rose, cheering, stomping their feet, until the gym shook with sound. I glanced toward my parents. My mother's face was pale, lips pressed tight. My father shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between me and the floor. Mason's jaw clenched, his smirk gone. For once, their reactions didn't matter. The applause wasn't for them. It was for me. Tears pricked my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I lifted my chin, nodded to the crowd, and stepped away from the podium. My heart pounded like a drum, but it was the most alive I had ever felt. As I returned to my seat, students reached out to pat my back, whispering, "That was brave, and good for you." Emily grabbed my hand, squeezing it tight. "You did it," she whispered, her voice trembling with pride. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Speeches were made, diplomas handed out, caps tossed into the air. But the only thing I could feel was the weight that had lifted off me. For the first time, I hadn't swallowed my pain. I had spoken it into existence. After the ceremony, outside in the warm evening air, families gathered for photos. Clusters of parents hugged their children, flowers exchanged hands, cameras flashed non-stop. My parents approached me stiffly, Mason trailing behind. "Harper," my father began, his tone forced and brittle. "That little speech of yours, was that really necessary?" I met his eyes, steady and unflinching. It was more than necessary. It was overdue. My mother crossed her arms, her voice sharp. "You embarrassed us." A bitter laugh escaped me. "No. I told the truth. You embarrassed yourselves years ago. Today, I just stopped covering for you." Mason scoffed, rolling his eyes. Always playing the victim. I turned to him, my voice calm but firm. "No, Mason. Not anymore. Today, I wasn't a victim. I was a survivor who finally spoke up." For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. He just stood there, frowning, while I walked away. Emily caught up with me moments later, her arm looping through mine. "You were incredible," she said softly. I exhaled, the tension leaving my body like air from a balloon. "For once," I replied. "I actually believe that." We walked toward the parking lot together, the sound of laughter and camera shutters fading behind us. The night sky stretched wide above, dark and endless, but for the first time, it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt full of possibility. It felt full of possibility. That thought carried me as Emily and I walked toward her car. The summer evening wrapping around us like a soft blanket. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the kind of beauty I rarely stopped to notice. For once, though, I slowed down, letting the quiet settle inside me. "Where to now?" Emily asked, unlocking the doors. I shrugged, sliding into the passenger seat. "Anywhere that doesn't feel like home." The word home sat bitter on my tongue. It wasn't a place I longed for. It was a weight I was learning to leave behind. That night, I didn't go back to my parents' house. Instead, I stayed at Emily's. Her mom welcomed me in without question, handing me a plate of leftover lasagna and a soft blanket for the couch. I hadn't realized how starved I was for simple kindness until I felt it. As I curled up under that blanket, listening to the hum of their dishwasher in the background, I thought, this is what it should feel like. Safe. Warm. Seen. Sleep came easier than it had in years. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds, painting stripes across the carpet. Emily was already at the table, sipping coffee, her textbooks spread out in front of her. "You know you can stay as long as you need," she said, her voice casual but full of meaning. I nodded, throat tight. "Thanks, Em. Really. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd figure it out," she said with a smile. "But I'm glad you don't have to do it alone." Her words gave me courage, the kind I'd never gotten from my own family. In the weeks that followed, I found myself piecing together a life that was mine and mine alone. I picked up extra shifts at the diner downtown, saving every dollar I could. It wasn't glamorous work. My feet ached after hours on the greasy tile floor. My apron smelled like fries and coffee, but each paycheck felt like a step closer to freedom. One evening after a long shift, as I counted tips at the counter, my boss, Mr. Riley, leaned against the register. "You're a hard worker, Harper," he said. "Ever think about moving up? Maybe training as a shift lead?" The offer startled me. No one had ever seen leadership in me before. "You really think I could handle that?" "I wouldn't offer if I didn't," he replied. "Sometimes people just need a chance." His words lit something inside me. A chance. That was all I'd ever wanted. Outside of work, I began exploring pieces of myself I had buried under years of neglect. I borrowed Emily's guitar, fumbling through chords until my fingers learned the rhythm. Music gave me an outlet, a way to turn the ache in my chest into something that sounded almost beautiful. One Saturday, Emily dragged me to a community art fair. At first, I felt out of place among the vendors and bright displays, but as I wandered, I stumbled across a booth where a local college had set up flyers for night classes. One read, Creative Writing Workshop. I picked it up, running my thumb along the edge. Writing had been my secret since childhood, the one thing that made me feel alive, even when no one cared enough to read my words. You should sign up, Emily urged when she saw the flyer in my hand. I shook my head. I wouldn't fit in. Those classes are for people who know what they're doing. You'll never know until you try, she countered. You deserve to invest in yourself, Harper. For once, just choose you. The words stuck with me. For once, choose you. The next week, I enrolled. Walking into that classroom for the first time, my palms were clammy, my heart racing. But the professor smiled warmly, the students welcomed me, and for the first time, I wasn't Harper who came second. I was Harper the writer. Assignments became a refuge. Each essay, each short story, felt like reclaiming a piece of my voice. I wrote about hospital rooms and quiet betrayals, about loneliness and resilience. My classmates didn't look away or dismiss me. They listened. They even applauded. That validation was like water to dry soil. I could feel myself growing. Still, the pull of the past lingered. One evening, while walking home from class, I saw Mason's car parked outside Emily's house. My stomach tightened. He leaned against the hood, arms crossed, the same smug expression plastered on his face. So this is what you've been up to? Playing house with your little friend. I stopped a few feet away, holding my books tighter. What do you want, Mason? Mom and Dad are furious, he said. You humiliated them at graduation. You think you're some kind of hero now. I met his gaze, steady and calm. No. I just told the truth. And if that makes them uncomfortable, that's not my problem anymore. He scoffed. You'll come crawling back. You always do. I stepped closer, my voice firm. Not this time. His smirk faltered. I walked past him, heart pounding, but for once, I wasn't afraid. I was free. Freedom didn't mean life was easy. Bills piled up, exhaustion weighed on me, and there were nights when doubt clawed at my resolve. But every challenge I faced was mine, not something handed to me with strings attached, not overshadowed by Mason's glow. I started to celebrate small victories. Paying rent on time, finishing a story draft, even laughing without fear of being silenced. These little milestones built into something bigger, a life shaped by my choices. Months later, I found myself back at the community fair, the same one where I'd discovered the writing class. This time, I wasn't a hesitant visitor. I was a participant, sitting at a booth with a stack of my short stories bound into simple booklets. People stopped by, flipping through pages, offering kind words. One older woman clutched a copy to her chest, tears in her eyes. This feels like my own life. Thank you for writing it. Her gratitude nearly undid me. For years, I'd been invisible. Now my words made someone else feel seen. That was the moment I realized I hadn't just broken free from my parents. I'd broken into myself. As the sun set over the fairground, painting the sky with fiery streaks, Emily joined me at the booth. Proud of you, she said, nudging my shoulder. I smiled, a genuine one that reached my eyes. For the first time, I think I'm proud of me too. We stood there together, the crowd buzzing around us, the air filled with music and laughter. I felt rooted in a way I never had before, strong, steady, whole. Breaking free hadn't just been about leaving my parents behind. It had been about stepping into the life I was meant to live. A life where I wasn't second best, where my voice carried, where I belonged. And I knew this was only the beginning.